Fast forward 4 millennia from Stonehenge, and not far away Isaac Newton is hard at work in London on his theory of gravity. He's already invented calculus to cope with the mathematics, but now needs an accurate value for the size of the Earth so he can calculate its precise volume, and thus fix his gravitational constant. Few realize that Newton was much more than a scientist. Today's scientists downplay the fact that their greatest hero was also a practicing alchemist, an art many today would consider pseudoscience. For example, Newton was the first to quantify temperature in 1700 with a scale that was based on the freezing and boiling points of water. I find it particularly interesting that Newton chose to measure his scale from 0 to 33 degrees. Conspiracy buffs are also aware of Newton being identified in the Dossier's Secrets as one of the Grand Masters of the Priory of Sion, an offshoot of the Templars. Whatever his reasons, Newton believed that the Great Pyramid's metrology encrypted the true dimensions of the Earth. John Greaves, professor of astronomy at the University of Oxford, surveyed the Great Pyramid just before Isaac Newton was born. Newton meticulously studied Greaves' work and based his own dissertations on ancient metrology on it. In 1637, Greaves made the most accurate survey of the Great Pyramid ever undertaken up to that point in history. He was the first to make the unlikely conclusion that the foot was at the root of the pyramid's measurements. To commemorate his discovery, Greaves inscribed a line inside the king's chamber, measuring precisely 1 English foot, with the words, "To be observed by all nations." The unfinished pyramid, that is without its absent pyramidion cap, measures exactly 480 English feet in height, which also happens to be precisely equal to 1/11th of a mile. The width comes in at exactly 756 feet. Herodotus, the father of history, explained that the Great Pyramid was originally capped by a small model pyramid called a pyramidion, which was sheathed in electrum, an alloy of gold and silver. Unfortunately, the valuable pyramidion is long gone. Richard Heath's metrology shows the Great Pyramid's pyramidion measured 1 1/11th feet in height. This metallic cap would reflect the sun's light and look a lot like the shining eye on top of the US dollar bill. The Great Pyramid is the sole surviving wonder of the ancient world. It remains the oldest, largest, and most accurate building ever built. It was the tallest structure in the world for 4 millennia. It is aligned within 0.1% of true north, and its 13-acre base supporting 2.3 million blocks of stone is horizontal and flat to within 15 millimeters. The mean opening in joints between exterior casing stones is less than 0.5 millimeter. The scale and accuracy are astounding. I believe that even with all the money in the world, we do not have the technical capability to replicate the Great Pyramid today. There is much to be said about the Great Pyramid's proportions. I've already mentioned how 7:11 was encoded in the Statue of Liberty. Renaissance artist Albrecht Dürer used the half-triangle proportion of 14:11 in his esoteric masterpiece Melancholia I. Richard Heath has found the half-triangle also encodes 365 days to 20 moons, an interesting astronomical take on the mystery. Notice how pi and phi, two of the most important numbers in mathematics, are also implicated and interrelated in the pyramid proportions. John Charles Webb Jr. has made a profound discovery about the location of the Great Pyramid that is unfortunately widely ignored because of its utter implausibility. Using Google Earth, we can measure the exact latitude of the center of the Grand Gallery inside the pyramid. It is 29.9792458 degrees north. The speed of light in the vacuum is 299,792,458 meters per second. Incredibly, these are the same numbers. How can this be? This correlation is either pure coincidence or evidence of something very profound. The meter as unit of length and the practice of dividing time into seconds would have to be coordinated for the location of the Great Pyramid to encode the speed of light. Nothing may sound more improbable, but this is exactly the sort of numbers game that I think the ancients played. Consider the fact that 1 second is one Earth rotation divided into 86,400 parts, because 1 day is equal to 86,400 seconds. Recall from the Stonehenge and San Francisco episodes that the Sun's diameter is 864,000 miles, and 864 is the number of the Sun. Perhaps the second and the mile were skillfully designed to express this beautiful harmony with the Sun. The kilometer was originally defined by assuming the Earth's meridian circumference equals 40,000 kilometers. In Paris Part 3, you'll learn more about something I call the Canon of 400. For a taste, consider that during a solar eclipse, the Moon perfectly covers the Sun disk. The only reason this occurs so precisely is because the Moon is exactly 400 times smaller than the Sun, while at the same time the Moon is 400 times closer to the Earth than the Sun. In addition, the Earth turns 400 times faster than the Moon. Perhaps saying the Earth has a meridian circumference of 40 million meters was no accident, as it's in the same number canon. I think the meter was secretly designed to resonate with the Sun. In fact, today the meter is circularly defined in terms of the speed of light, which is itself measured in meters per second. Consider the possibility that the meter is an ancient unit that was merely reintroduced 300 years ago, during a time of great Hermetic obsession in France. With these facts in mind, it is easier to see how disparate units based on our planet's source of light truly encode the speed of light using the location of the Great Pyramid itself. Our history books somehow miss the fact that architects at the dawn of history knew the speed of light in the vacuum and the exact size of the Earth with pinpoint accuracy. Perhaps the Great Pyramid was made before the Egyptian culture began, by different architects entirely. In 1964, Alex Badawi and Victoria Trimble discovered that shafts in the King's Chamber within the Great Pyramid pointed directly at a belt star in the Orion constellation, and the pole star at the time the pyramid was built. In 1993, Rudolf Gantenbrink got permission from the Egyptian authorities to send a robot up shafts in the Great Pyramid. He was able to accurately measure the exact shaft angles, and this data allowed Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert to run astronomical calculations showing precisely where the shafts in the King's and Queen's chambers are pointing to in the sky. In their 1995 book, The Orion Mystery, Bauval and Gilbert revealed that the shafts in the Queen's chamber point directly to the star Sirius in the south, and to the pole star at the time the pyramid was built in the north. I can understand the pole star connection, because recognizing that stars rotate around the celestial pole is the most fundamental observation in astronomy. But why do the other shafts point to Orion and Sirius? The book Talisman by Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval sheds light on this mystery. Orion and Sirius represented Osiris and his consort Isis to the ancient Egyptians. They are in a region of the sky called the Duat, the Egyptian netherworld, where souls journeyed and were judged after death. Hieroglyphs in the 3,400-year-old tomb of Thutmose III explain the benefits of copying the Duat upon the earth. Whoever shall make a copy of the Duat, and shall know it upon earth, it shall act as a magical protector for him, both in heaven and in earth, unfailingly, regularly, and eternally. So the Egyptians believed building copies of Orion and Sirius upon the earth acted as magical talismans, bringing the power of heaven down to earth. We've certainly seen a much more recent example of this in Washington, D.C. The Orion constellation is often depicted as a hunter with a sword between his legs. Dan S. Ward of Halexandria.org says, "No male wears a sword between his legs, and very few hunters carry a sword. Perhaps a more appropriate description of that which is hanging down below Orion's waist is that of a phallus. The area of Osiris's phallus contains the Orion Nebula, one of the most studied regions of space, because it is an incredibly generative area where stars are continually being formed. How appropriate. By the way, we are in the Orion spur of the Milky Way galaxy, and Sirius is the brightest star in the sky by a wide margin, because it is one of our nearest neighbors. We now have the astronomical knowledge to recognize we are actually quite close to the Duat. Bauval and Gilbert showed that the three pyramids of Giza actually have the same position and relative sizes as the belt stars of Orion. Dr. Gerhard Heine noticed that just as the belt stars of Orion point at Sirius, the pyramids point directly at Heliopolis, ancient center of Egyptian science, art, and religion, which was a single unified body of knowledge in ancient times. Pythagoras, Plato, and many other ancient philosophers journeyed to Heliopolis, were initiated there in the Egyptian mysteries, and spread them in the West. Today the only thing that's left of this entire city is a single obelisk, which happens to be the oldest standing obelisk in the world. Incidentally, this single obelisk is all that's left of the ancient Temple of the Phoenix, which was described by Herodotus. I can't help but recall phoenix imagery in the Security Council chamber of the United Nations. It's amazing how many connections there are between the symbolism of the elite and ancient Egypt. You've already heard about one Heliopolitan obelisk next to the Met in New York City, and its pair on the Victoria Embankment in London. Rome has the remainder of the Heliopolitan obelisks left in the world. Heliopolis was the cult center for the 9 great Egyptian gods, collectively called the Ennead. We'll learn more about the Ennead in San Francisco.